Imagine waking up one day to discover that the life you thought you knew, the very identity you believed was yours, was built on a lie so intricate, so unbelievable that it shatters everything you thought about your family, your past, and even yourself. This is the story of Clayton Harris, a man who spent 42 years believing he was a twin, only to find out that the truth of his existence is far more complicated than anyone could have imagined. It all started with a phone call, an ordinary Wednesday, just like any other. But what came through the line that day would change everything. "Mr. Harris," said the voice on the other end, calm but with an unmistakable edge of urgency. "We need to speak about a DNA sample from 1989, your childhood sample." At first, I thought it was a mistake. Surely they had the wrong person. My childhood memories, my parents, my brother Roland, how could a DNA test call all of that into question? I had spent 35 years living as the overlooked twin, the one who never got the accolades, the praise, the recognition, the one who quietly followed shipping routes instead of stock portfolios, who tracked cargo vessels across the Pacific rather than counting investment returns. And all the while, my brother Roland was the chosen one, the golden boy, the heir to everything our parents had worked for. Roland, born 2 minutes before me on a cold February morning in 1982. Those 2 minutes? They might as well have been 2 decades for how differently our parents treated us. Our father, Gerald Harris, had built a real estate empire from nothing. A single apartment building in downtown Portland, expanding into skyscrapers across 3 states. Our mother, Monica, came from old money, the kind of lineage that carried expectations as heavy as their ancestral portraits, and together they were Pacific Northwest royalty. Roland was their crown prince. Every success he achieved was celebrated, every decision he made applauded, every future he envisioned blessed. "Your brother just closed the waterfront deal," Dad would announce at dinner. $40 million in pure profit. That was my brother. And me. I had my maritime shipping reports, numbers nobody ever asked about, numbers that were invisible in the glow of Roland's achievements. It wasn't just about money. It was about attention, approval, and identity. Roland had the perfect smile that charmed everyone he met, the sharp jawline, the calculating eyes that mirrored our father. And me? I was told I must have taken after some distant relative nobody remembered. I was the spare, the one left behind when life handed out rewards. Then the unthinkable happened. Our parents died in a car accident in Switzerland, a tragedy that should have united us, that should have reminded us of what truly mattered. Roland held my hand at the funeral. "We're all we have left now," he said. I believed him. But when the will was read a week later, reality hit harder than any loss could. Everything went to Roland. Every property, every dollar, every piece of art, every vintage car, even Mom's jewelry, gone. And me? I was left with a single check for $50,000, a token meant to take care of the lesser son. The money itself didn't anger me. It was what it represented. 3.5 decades of being the spare, now made official, and then came the phone call from Helix Genetic Archives. The woman on the line sounded anxious, almost afraid. She knew details about me I hadn't shared in decades, the date of my birth, the study I participated in as a child, even the doctor who had conducted it, Dr. Marcus Ellison. My mind raced. Was there a mistake? Was my childhood sample mixed with someone else's? Or was the technology faulty? I drove 4 hours to Burlington, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. Every scenario played out in my head, none of them comforting. And yet the words she spoke next made my stomach drop into a chasm I didn't know existed. "When we compared your childhood DNA to your brother Roland's, the results revealed something impossible. One of you doesn't exist on paper. Impossible." Those words echoed in my mind as I parked outside the glass doors of Helix Genetic Archives, every step toward that building heavy with questions I wasn't sure I wanted answers to. Something my mother said years ago haunted me. "You have no idea what we sacrificed for this family, Clayton. No idea what we had to accept." At the time, I thought she meant financial struggles, early hardships before Dad's empire took off. Now I wondered, had she meant something far darker? Something about February 1982, about two boys who were supposedly twins, and yet, in some fundamental way, weren't. Inside the building, Dr. Pamela Reeves was waiting, 2 manila folders in hand. The weight of those folders was more than paper. They carried decades of secrets, truths that would rewrite every memory I held about Roland, about my parents, about myself. I braced myself, knowing that the answers would demolish everything I thought I knew. Roland and I, strangers in our own story, connected not by blood, but by a meticulously crafted deception. Every photograph, every birthday, every staged family portrait was a thread in a tapestry meant to hide the truth. I had believed I was adopted, or perhaps that there had been some medical anomaly at birth. I was wrong. The lie was deeper, more deliberate, more incomprehensible than anything I could have imagined. And yet, life before this revelation had been a study in contrasts. Roland, the golden child, thriving in a mansion in Westfield Heights, Harvard Business School, a senator's daughter for a wife, tennis courts, wine cellars, luxury cars. Me? Clayton Harris, modest shipping company office overlooking Terminal 6, fuel calculations, dock negotiations, a small apartment with peeling paint and harbor views. And through it all, Roland never flaunted his wealth, never rubbed in his successes. He invited me to dinner, poured me expensive scotch, offered support silently, humbly. "We're family," he'd say. And yet family had its shadows. Our parents' deaths left us in a vacuum of grief and unanswered questions. Funeral after funeral, handshakes, tears, condolences, everyone around us mourning Gerald and Monica, but nobody questioning the lives they had constructed, the secrets they carried to the grave. Hundreds came to honor them. Business associates, city council members, even former governors. But the truth remained buried. Until that phone call. I thought I understood what it meant to be the lesser son. I had spent decades accepting it, living quietly in the shadow of a brother who seemed destined for greatness. And yet, when DNA revealed the impossibility of our connection, a fire ignited inside me, a need to understand, to uncover the labyrinth of deception that had shaped my life. Every detail from my childhood, every staged photograph, every whispered parental comment suddenly took on new meaning. Why did our baby pictures always seem forced? Why did it feel as though the universe had placed two strangers side by side, pretending we belonged to each other? Those questions, once idle curiosities, became urgent, screaming riddles demanding answers. Walking through the doors of Helix Genetic Archives, I felt the weight of history pressing down on me. The sacrifices my parents made, the decisions that had dictated decades of lives, and the secrets buried so deep that even death couldn't protect them. Dr. Reeves, calm but precise, began laying out the timeline, the study, the genetic discrepancies. Each revelation felt like a hammer blow, knocking down walls I had built around my identity. The truth was waiting for me in those folders, in the quiet hum of computers and fluorescent lights, a truth that would destroy Roland's world, reconstruct mine, and force me to confront the life I thought I had been living. The twin I had believed I was? A role I had been cast in long before I could speak, a fiction my parents had written, perfected and hidden behind smiles, dinners, and ordinary family life. And the more I learned, the more I realized that nothing about my past was simple. Not the inheritance, not the sibling rivalry, not the shared birthdays, not the promises whispered at funerals. Every detail, every memory, every small kindness had been colored by an intricate lie. A lie so profound that it made me question not just who I was, but why I existed at all. As I absorbed the revelations, I understood the enormity of what had been kept from me. Not just my parents, not just Roland, but the entire world had lived. Alongside this secret, oblivious to the fact that two boys who called each other brother were connected by circumstance, not by blood. The lie spanned decades, woven into celebrations, milestones, and quiet moments alike, and now it was unraveling, thread by delicate thread, before my eyes. The shock, the disbelief, the anger, the curiosity, it all collided inside me. I had been shipping containers, calculating routes, navigating life quietly while Roland navigated empires. And suddenly I realized everything I had been told about my place in this world, about my identity, about my family, it could no longer be trusted. I stepped out of the archives that day carrying more than folders. I carried a key to a story that had been hidden from me for 42 years, a story that promised answers, but also demanded questions. Questions about loyalty, identity, and what it really means to be a brother. Roland had built a life on certainty, on inheritance, on a shared past that no longer existed in the way he thought it did. And me? I had been living quietly in a shadow, only to find that the shadow itself had been an illusion. Every photograph, every birthday, every word spoken by my parents, every glance they gave, suddenly had a new weight, a meaning I was only beginning to understand. The story of Clayton and Roland Harris was no longer one of simple sibling rivalry or parental favoritism. It was a story of deception, revelation, and identity, of lives intertwined not by nature but by the careful crafting of others, a story that demanded to be uncovered, piece by piece. And as I looked out over the harbor from my modest apartment, watching the ships I had spent decades tracking, I knew one thing with absolute clarity. The truth of who I am, and who Roland really is, was only beginning to surface. Every secret that had been buried, every lie carefully maintained, every moment of my past that had felt strange or forced, it all had a reason I was determined to discover. And what I found next would not only shake Roland to his core, but it would also force me to redefine everything I thought I knew about family, identity, and the lives we think are ours, because some secrets are so profound that even death cannot protect them. And I was about to uncover the deepest one of all. Imagine sitting in a room, surrounded by grief, and realizing that the life you thought you knew, every memory, every relationship, every ounce of identity you had carefully built, was nothing more than a masterful illusion. This is the story of Clayton Harris, a man whose entire existence was shattered in a single phone call, revealing a secret so enormous, so meticulously hidden, that it changes everything you thought you knew about family, loyalty, and truth. It started in the hushed halls of a funeral home. Gerald Harris, my father, had spent decades crafting the Portland skyline, turning a single apartment building into a real estate empire that stretched across states. Monica, my mother, was a figure of elegance and philanthropy, admired for her charitable work and her dedication to the arts. Outwardly, their lives were perfect. Behind closed doors, though, the reality was far messier. Dad spent countless nights in his office while Mom drowned her evenings in 3 martinis nightly, something I'd known for as long as I could remember, but nobody dared speak about. Roland gave the eulogy. He spoke of legacy, of honor, of carrying the Harris name into the future. And there I was, sitting quietly in the second row behind Margot and her family, wondering why my calls to Mom on her birthday went unanswered, brushed off because Roland's taking us to dinner. We'll catch up later. 3 months later, the truth would hit harder than any eulogy could. Convey, the will reading, an event so steeped in old money pomp and leather-bound respectability that it could intimidate even the most composed, was held in Maxwell Drummond's office. Maxwell had been my father's attorney for 30 years, and even he couldn't meet my eyes as he read aloud the terms of our inheritance. The entirety of the estate, he said, his voice carefully neutral, goes to Roland Chase Harris. This includes all real estate holdings, investment portfolios, business interests, and personal property. I remember the room falling silent. Roland shifted comfortably in his chair, Margot examined her manicure, and Maxwell shuffled his papers like a man holding back a sigh. "Must be something for Clayton," Roland finally said. Maxwell cleared his throat. "There's a small life insurance policy, $50,000. It's separate from the estate. $50,000 out of a $90 million fortune." It was almost insulting enough to be funny. Roland patted my shoulder as we left. "Don't worry, Clay, I'll take care of you. Mom and Dad always loved me more, but you're still my brother." Those words, delivered as casually as a weather report, stung with truth. They had loved him more. Always had. But, sitting in my apartment that night, staring out over the harbor as lights reflected like scattered memories on the water, I asked myself for the first time, why? Why was one twin worth everything while the other was worth $50,000? What invisible mark had I carried since birth that made me less than? For 3 months, Roland's idea of taking care of me remained unchanged. A check and a dismissive text. It wasn't the money that burned, it was what it represented. Decades of being the afterthought, officially codified in legal documents, a testament to a lifetime of living in someone else's shadow. I returned to Cascade Freight Lines, tracking containers from Shanghai to Seattle, trying to fill the void with work. Glenn, my supervisor, asked if I needed more time off. "Must be tough losing both parents," he said with sympathetic eyes. But the toughest part, the unbearable truth, was that my parents had never really been mine to lose. And then it happened. A Thursday morning, routine and unassuming, transformed into the day my reality was irreversibly shattered. I was reviewing manifest documents, coffee in hand, when the phone rang. "Unknown number, Vermont area code. Mr. Clayton Harris?" A woman's voice asked, clinical, nervous. "This is Dr. Pamela Reeves from Helix Genetic Archives. We have your DNA sample from 1989. I laughed at first, disbelief warming the edges of my voice. I'd never given any DNA sample. "Your parents submitted it when you were 7, she explained. "Part of an early childhood genetic study for inherited diseases. We've been digitizing old samples, and yours matched someone in our current database." Her words hit me like an ice storm. Someone in the present, someone close, someone I knew intimately, was connected to a sample that shouldn't exist. "Could you come to our facility?" she asked. "This is unusual." Unusual? That word barely scratched the surface. "It concerns your brother, Roland, as well," she continued. The blood drained from my face. My stomach sank. "Is this about a health issue? Something genetic?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Not exactly," she said. "How soon can you be here?" I told Glenn I had a family emergency and drove 4 hours to Burlington, my mind racing through possibilities that offered no comfort. The Helix Genetic Archives building, glass, steel, and an unforgiving, almost antiseptic chill, loomed before me like a tomb of hidden truths. Dr. Reeves met me in the lobby, her worried eyes behind thick glasses conveying the gravity of the moment before a single word was spoken. We entered a sterile conference room. 2 manila folders sat on the table labeled simply C. Harris, 1989, and R. Harris, 2024. "Your parents enrolled both you and your brother in our genetic study in 1989, Dr. Reeves explained. "We've kept these samples in cold storage. Last month, someone submitted a DNA sample for ancestry analysis. Your brother, Roland." I nodded. Margot had mentioned they were trying to have kids, probably just checking for genetic issues. But that was the trigger. She gestured for me to sit. "When we ran his modern sample against our historical database," she continued, voice steady but grave, "the results raised immediate red flags. Mr. Harris, according to these results, you and Roland share 0 genetic overlap." 0. The room tilted. My hands gripped the edge of the table. "Impossible," I said. "We're twins. Born the same day, same hospital, same parents. The birth certificates, I've checked them 3 times. She pulled out more documents. Twins, even fraternal, share about 50% of their DNA. You and Roland share nothing. You're not related at all. The air went cold. Adopted? Maybe. But Dr. Reeves shook her head slowly. It's more complicated. Your blood type is O negative. Both your parents were AB positive. Genetically, this is impossible. I could barely breathe. Every childhood memory, every photograph, every birthday party replayed in my mind. But now it felt like I'd been living someone else's life. Roland's blood type is consistent with being their biological child, she continued, but his genetic ancestry is different. While your parents are European, Irish, German, some Italian, Roland's DNA is predominantly Persian and Lebanese. Neither of you are their biological children. I stared at the numbers, charts, and markers, each one a dagger of truth I hadn't wanted to face. According to Portland General Hospital records, February 15, 1982, she said, pulling another document. Monica Harris gave birth to one child. One. Not twins. I choked on the reality forming before me. Then where did I come from? Dr. Reeves leaned forward. Your DNA shows European ancestry consistent with the Harris family line. In fact, you match several genetic markers we would expect from Gerald Harris's biological child, but Monica Harris is not your biological mother. The revelation hit like lightning. A lifelong lie, meticulously crafted, now laid bare. And as she continued, the scope of the deception became clear. Mismatched signatures, forged birth certificates, fabricated identities. A fraud so deliberate, it had begun the day I was supposedly born. Every photo, every Christmas card, every word from my parents, every staged moment, carefully orchestrated. Roland knew he was getting everything 3 months before our parents died. Did they know I wasn't really their son? Did they intentionally write me out of the story of our inheritance, cementing the lie in legal documents? This wasn't a simple adoption, Dr. Reeves said softly. This was deliberate, orchestrated fraud. Someone went to extraordinary lengths, and it started the day you were supposedly born. I left the archives shaken, my car engine off but my hands gripping the wheel as though it were the only anchor to reality I had. The folders, 40 pages of genetic evidence, hospital records, mismatched signatures, lay on the passenger seat. Copies in hand, cloud backups ready, recording apps tested twice over. Roland's photo stared back at me from my phone, a smug smile in a ridiculous holiday sweater. I dialed. Clay, I'm in a board meeting, he said when he answered. We need to talk in person tonight. I added 3 simple words, and 1982. Silence. Then his voice, tense, careful, almost vulnerable. Come to the house at 8. Margot's at her mother's place. I'll be there, Clay. How much do you know? I hung up, let him wonder, let him sweat. I spent the next hours preparing, uploading, recording, making sure that when the time came, the truth could no longer hide behind charm, wealth, or carefully constructed lies. Because some secrets are so profound, so meticulously buried, that even the closest bonds can't protect them. And the revelation I was about to confront would not just redefine my identity, it would shake Roland's world to its very core. Every document, every fact, every hidden truth pointed toward one conclusion. This was more than a family secret. It was a story of deception, power, and a lie that had controlled my life from the very beginning. And the moment I crossed the threshold into that confrontation, I knew one thing for certain. Nothing would ever be the same again. The night air was crisp as I drove through familiar streets, but tonight familiarity felt like a trap. 40 minutes from my apartment to Roland's estate, roads I'd navigated hundreds of times over holidays, pool parties, celebrations of his victories. I'd always been the supportive sibling, the one smiling politely while the world adored him. But tonight it wasn't a brother I was going to see. It was a stranger, a man who had shared my childhood, my memories, but not my blood. The gates opened automatically as they always did. Roland had given me the code years ago, long before I understood its significance. The driveway curved past meticulously sculpted gardens, fountains reflecting the estate's opulent lights, sculptures worth more than most people's homes. The mansion stood like a testament to Roland's triumph. Clean lines, walls of glass, perfect architecture proclaiming victory in every corner. But tonight, all of that perfection was meaningless. Roland opened the door before I could ring. His hair, usually flawless, was tousled, his shirt untucked, his face weary. "You went to Helix," he said, not a question, just a statement. "You knew." He didn't offer an explanation, just turned and walked toward his study. I followed, my eyes tracing the family portraits lining the hallway. My parents on their wedding day, Roland in his Harvard graduation robes, and us as children, matching sailor suits, yet looking nothing alike even then. How had I never questioned it? His study was dark wood and leather, designed to intimidate anyone who stepped inside. Behind his desk, diplomas, business awards, and photos of him with governors and CEOs lined the walls. He had already poured 2 glasses of whiskey. The good stuff, 50-year-old scotch that Dad had saved for a special occasion. He handed me one. "Seems appropriate," he said. "Dad always said this was for when the truth needed telling." I took the glass, the amber liquid trembling slightly in my hand. Then he said it. "So you know, we're not brothers," I laughed, but it was hollow disbelief echoing in my voice. 3 years? Roland nodded, his expression neutral, almost sad. 3 years. Found out when Margot and I were trying to conceive. Fertility tests revealed some interesting facts about my genetic heritage. My grip tightened on the glass. 3 years, I repeated, voice low, hurt slicing through me. "You knew, and never said anything?" "What was I supposed to say, Clay?" he replied, voice calm but defensive. "Hey, by the way, our entire childhood was a lie. Mom and Dad aren't who we thought. Everything about our family. Fiction." "Yes," I said, my voice shaking with anger. "That's exactly what you should have said." He walked to the window overlooking the estate. Pool, tennis court, sculptures, all monuments to the life he had built. "I hired a private investigator, best in the business. Took him 8 months to piece together what happened in 1982. He turned to face me, and for the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. "Are you sure you want to know? Because once you know, you can't unknow it. Clay, the truth is worse than anything you're imagining right now." I set my phone on his desk, the recording app blinking red. "Tell me everything." Roland hesitated, staring at the device, then down at the whiskey. He drained it in one swallow, moving toward his safe. "If we're doing this, we do it with all the evidence," he said. "After tonight, we're either closer than ever, or we're done forever." The safe door swung open, revealing stacks of documents, bundles of cash, and a thick manila envelope, older than the rest. He pulled it out, hands trembling slightly. "Mom gave this to her lawyer with instructions to give it to me after both she and Dad died," Roland said. "Maxwell handed it over after the will reading when you'd already left. She insisted I read it alone." The envelope was labeled in Monica's handwriting. "For Roland. The truth about February 1982. Roland continued, pulling out another folder. "Here's what my investigator found. Your biological mother was Diane Novak, Dad's secretary from 1980 to 1982. She was 23, brilliant, fresh out of college, handled the books for his first major development deal." He showed me a photograph. A young woman with green eyes, the same sharp cheekbones, the same crooked smile reflected in my own mirror every morning. Dad had had an affair. Diane had gotten pregnant. I felt my throat constrict. "She died?" "Yes," Roland said softly. "Complications during delivery. The hospital tried everything, but she was gone within hours of giving birth." Dad panicked. "Mom, who was due to give birth to Roland any day, was convinced to take you in, to raise you as my twin. Hospital staff were paid off, documents forged, an entire narrative, carefully constructed. Twins. Who would question twins? Except Mom could never fully do it. She looked at you and saw Diane, the woman who had almost destroyed her marriage. 'So, I am Gerald's son,' I said, voice trembling. Roland's expression softened, almost pitying. 'That's what I thought too. Until I read Mom's letter." He opened the envelope from the safe and pulled out several handwritten pages. "I'll let you read it yourself, but here's the part that changes everything." He found a page and read aloud. "The cruelest irony is what we discovered when Roland was 5. The fertility clinic made a mistake with my IVF treatments. Roland isn't Gerald's biological son. A sample mix-up meant our golden boy shared no DNA with either of us. But by then we'd already decided. Roland was ours by choice. Clayton was ours by obligation. We gave Roland everything because he was the son we selected, even if science failed us. Clayton was the son Gerald forced on me, the living reminder of betrayal." The room spun. Roland wasn't Dad's biological son. Roland laughed bitterly. The fertility clinic had confirmed it 3 years ago. A med student mixed up the samples. His biological father was a Lebanese graduate student, anonymous. "I'm the only actual Harris," I whispered, voice barely audible. "The true heir." Roland pulled out another document, Diane Novak's will. She came from money. Her father owned Novak International Freight. When she died, she left everything to her son. To you. I stared at the documents. Shares in companies worth millions. Trust funds growing for decades. Properties in Seattle and San Francisco. "Dad hid this from you," Roland said quietly. "Lawyers buried it in paperwork. Shell corporations. All still waiting. Your biological mother made sure you'd be taken care of, even if she couldn't raise you." "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked. Roland walked back to the window. "I've spent 3 months living with the guilt. I inherited a fortune that belongs to the only person who actually has Harris blood. Mom and Dad are gone. The lie doesn't need to continue. You could have remained unaware, I know. I know that I'm nobody's son. Not really. My legal parents weren't related to me. The brother I grew up with, he's the only one with a legitimate claim to the Harris name." Tears filled his eyes. "You want to know the really sick part? They loved me more anyway. The stranger, the accident, the clinic's mistake. They loved me more than their own flesh and blood. And what does that say about love, Clay? What does it say about family?" I stood and walked to him. For the first time in 42 years, I hugged Roland. He broke down completely, sobbing into my shoulder like the child he had never been allowed to be. The perfect son who discovered he was nobody's son at all. I left that night with a box of documents, photographs, and the truth about who I really was. Roland kept the Harris fortune, the estate, the life built on genetic fiction. I kept the knowledge that I was the only real Harris left. And yet, outside his mansion, I realized something profound. Being the real son hadn't mattered to our parents. So why should it matter now? 2 weeks later, Roland called. "I'm meeting with lawyers. Setting up a trust, half of everything. It should be yours, Clay." "I don't want it, Roland." "Then what do you want?" I thought, really thought. "I want us to be brothers. Real brothers. Not because of DNA, inheritance, or our parents' lies. Because we choose it." Silence. Then I heard it. Roland crying. Not polite tears at a funeral, but raw, uncontrollable sobs. "Clay," he whispered, "I've been so terrified of losing everything. I never realized I'd already lost the only thing that mattered. You. I spent 42 years being the favorite son, and it made me forget how to be a brother." "We both forgot," I said. "Or maybe we never learned." We started meeting every Sunday at Rosie's, a diner halfway between his mansion and my apartment. Vinyl booths, coffee burnt to bitterness, neutral ground. No crystal glasses, no marble floors, just us. At first, we didn't speak of money, inheritance, or lies. We spoke of football, his struggles with IVF, my new job teaching maritime navigation at Portland Community College, a job I took after leaving Cascade Freight Lines. "Why'd you quit?" Roland asked over pancakes one Sunday. "Didn't feel right," I said, staring out the window at rain streaking the glass. Tracking cargo, knowing my biological mother's family built their fortune in shipping, it felt like I was working for ghosts. And in that moment, across the table from the brother I had chosen, I understood something profound. Some truths are more powerful than blood. Some connections transcend lies, inheritance, and deception. Some bonds are forged, not given, and as we sipped our coffee in the dim light of Rosie's, I realized that even in the shadows of betrayal, loss, and secrets that could shatter lives, a new story had begun. A story where choice mattered more than DNA, where family was something you became, not something you were born into, where the past could be faced, not feared, and the future could be built together. The road ahead was uncertain. The documents, the letters, the truths I now held could unravel lives. But sitting across from Roland, listening to him laugh softly, sharing memories and confessions, I knew one thing with absolute clarity. Some family secrets are meant to destroy. Others are meant to teach, and ours was just beginning to teach us the most important lesson of all. The understanding in Roland's eyes was different now. The old confidence, the perfect composure, replaced by something human, something vulnerable. He nodded slowly, like he finally saw me, not just as a reflection of a life he'd been taught to dominate, but as a man in his own right. "I'm thinking of selling the business," he said quietly. "Dad's company. It doesn't feel like mine anymore." I blinked, taken aback. "It's yours more than anyone's. You built it into what it is now, with a name that wasn't really mine, and money that should have been yours. You earned it." We went around like that for weeks. Two men trying to figure out what family meant when every memory, every expectation, every symbol of inheritance had been a lie. Slowly, the tension between us began to change. Conversations that once ended in polite silence now had room for honesty. And just when I thought we'd reached a fragile understanding, Dr. Reeves called. "Mr. Harris," her voice came through the line, clinical yet tinged with excitement. "I've been doing additional research into your case. There's more to your mother's story. Diane Novak had a sister, Ruth. She's been looking for you for 40 years. The thought of meeting someone who had held pieces of my past that I didn't even know existed felt surreal. Weeks later, I found myself sitting in a Seattle coffee shop across from a woman whose eyes mirrored my own. Ruth. She clutched a box of photographs as if it were the most precious thing she owned. I could feel the weight of history in her hands, the fragments of a life never shared, a life I'd never known. Inside that box were images frozen in time. Diane winning a high school science fair, her proud valedictorian moment at the University of Washington, the delicate curve of her smile the day before she died, heavy with the hope of a life she would never see fulfilled. "She loved you already," Ruth said, her voice gentle, reverent. Sliding a letter across to me, she let me absorb what my mother had written decades before I was born. A mother who had never held me, never kissed my forehead, never whispered words of encouragement as I stumbled through life, yet had imagined a future for me, written down her hopes, her dreams, her belief in my worth. I spent nights reading that letter, nights when the city outside my window was silent and I could hear my own heartbeat. Diane had planned for me, not the details, not my career or my home, but the essence of who she hoped I would become. Kind, honest, loved. She couldn't have known that the family who would raise me would do so under obligation, a living reminder of an affair, a lie tangled in every family photograph, every birthday card, every holiday dinner. Yet, out of that dysfunction, Roland and I began to understand what brotherhood truly meant. We redefined our relationship slowly, cautiously, not with the cold arithmetic of inheritance, but with choices. And when it came to the wealth that had been used to define our roles in life, we found something better than division. We combined forces. We created the Diane Novak Foundation, blending the hidden assets of my biological mother with the Harris estate. The foundation would help children caught in adult deceptions, those who had lost parents, those who needed to understand that even when life is chaotic, even when the people who brought them into the world are flawed or absent, they still have a place. And then came Margot's pregnancy. Roland asked me to be the godfather. "You're the only real family this kid will have," he said. "Biologically, I'm nobody, but you're actually his uncle in a weird way. Same father, at least legally. We're all nobody," I laughed softly, shaking my head. "And yet, We're all somebody. That's what family is. The baby was born in February, the month that had always been heavy with significance for Roland and me, the month that marked a birthday we had shared, yet never fully understood. They named him Gerald Clayton Harris. Not after our father, Roland explained, but after us, the brothers who weren't brothers, who became brothers by choice. I held that baby in my arms, a child who was not my nephew, whose bloodline intertwined with none of mine. I looked at Roland, who was smiling at his son, a son who carried none of the Harris blood his parents had once revered, and in that moment something profound crystallized inside me. Love, the kind that endures, the kind that builds bridges, is not written in DNA. It's written in the choices we make every day, to show up, to forgive, to protect, to nurture, and to embrace the ones we call family, not because we have to, but because we choose to. For decades, our parents had tried to manage life, to control the narrative, to prioritize bloodlines over connection. They were wrong. Roland and I had lived those lies, inherited those secrets, yet out of the ashes, we forged a bond that was ours entirely. On paper, the Harris fortune belonged to Roland. The Novak shipping legacy was mine. But the real inheritance, the knowledge of who we were, the power to decide who we wanted to be, the freedom to build family from truth rather than fiction, that belonged to both of us. And in that, we found a wealth that no bank, no estate, no trust fund could ever match. I began to see the patterns, the subtle lessons hidden in every hardship. The loss, the betrayal, the convoluted web of lies, all of it had led us here, to clarity, here, to choice, here to understanding that the families who matter aren't always the ones we are born into. Sometimes the most meaningful families are those we consciously create. Roland and I started our Sunday mornings at Rosie's, a small diner equidistant from his mansion and my apartment. Vinyl booths, coffee burned long past palatability, neutral ground. At first, we avoided the complicated conversations. No discussions of money, inheritance, or the past. We spoke of simple things. Football games, mundane struggles, victories both big and small. My life, now teaching maritime navigation at Portland Community College, became the subject of stories and questions. "Why'd you quit Cascade Freight Lines?" he asked one Sunday, pancakes in front of him, syrup pooling around the edges of his plate. "Didn't feel right," I admitted. Tracking cargo, knowing my biological mother's family built their fortune in shipping, it felt like I was working for ghosts. He nodded thoughtfully, as if for the first time truly seeing me. Not the shadow of a brother, not the obligation imposed by a secret, but the man I had become on my own terms. Through these Sundays, something extraordinary began to unfold. We were no longer defined by secrets, by lies, by wealth or inheritance. We were defined by our choices, our presence, our ability to forgive and to rebuild. And as I watched Roland laugh over pancakes, the sunlight falling on his hair, the world outside moving on indifferent to our personal history, I realized that the legacy we had inherited was not money, not property, not bloodlines. It was resilience. It was the capacity to love despite betrayal. It was the ability to reconstruct a family from the fragments left behind. In the end, the Harris fortune and the Novak legacy were trivial compared to the truths we had uncovered, the bonds we had forged, and the decisions we had made to embrace one another, not as pawns in a scheme, not as heirs to fortunes, but as brothers by choice, by intent, by conscious love. Every Sunday at Rosie's, with the hum of conversation, the clink of coffee cups, and the faint smell of burnt syrup, we were rewriting our story. One honest conversation, one shared laugh, one choice at a time. The past could no longer dictate us. The lies could no longer define us. We were free. And in that freedom, I discovered something that no DNA test, no fortune, and no family secret could ever provide. That the essence of family is not born. It is made, nurtured, and chosen. The Harris name, the Novak inheritance, the decades of deception, they were all part of a story we survived. But what we chose from that story, what we held on to, and how we loved each other from that point forward, that was our true legacy. As I held the newborn Gerald Clayton Harris, I felt the weight of history and the lightness of choice coexisting in a single heartbeat. The cycle of deception had ended. The story of real brotherhood had begun. And in that fragile, perfect moment, I understood the truest truth of all. Love isn't inherited. Family isn't dictated by blood. It's written in every decision we make to be present, to forgive, and to care. And as the sun set over the Seattle skyline, painting the sky in streaks of gold and crimson, I realized that this choice, this connection, this deliberate chosen bond was worth more than any fortune, worth more than any secret, worth everything.